And welcome back, everybody, to Double Down with Breslo, where we cover everything going on in the business of sports betting. We got a really unique guest today. We're going to be focusing on the fantasy side of sports betting and in an area of sports betting that you don't hear that much about, at least not in the U.S., and that is in the racing space, the car racing space, and perhaps other elements of racing. But we've got Ross Fruin here to tell us all about it. He is the founder and CEO of GridRival, which he started a few years ago. And we welcome you to the program. Thanks for coming on, Russ.
James, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Look forward to chatting.
Yeah, so give us a little background on you, first of all, how you wound up in this space. Is it because you're an amazing racing fan or amazing sports betting fan, or both?
Definitely was much more of a motorsports fan than I was a kind of, sports better fantasy player, which is kind of how the thing started in the to begin with. So a little bit of my background, I've kind of been an entrepreneur in one way, shape, or form since, early 20s. I started my first business when I was 28, which was in the media buying space, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And started this as a side project. And it really started out of, I'll just say a very large percentage, I think, of motorsports fans are often not traditional sports fans. And so that's kind of how I was growing up as well. And as a result, I kind of always saw every year my friends playing season-long fantasy football and doing March Madness and kind of the engagement that it created, and was just always a little bit jealous that nothing like that existed for some of the sports that I really loved, which I kind of love all motorsports across the board. There's not much that I don't like, but I really have always, been a huge Formula One fan since about the early 2000s when I was a teenager. And so I took the opportunity to finally solve the problem. And so the business actually started as me scratching an itch that I had. And so built a season-long fantasy Formula One game that was desktop web only. It was not even a mobile app. This was back in 2017. And had no, I would say maybe not no, but close to no business ambition for it. It was purely just for fun. And ended up signing up about 25,000 users the first week or so that it was online.
Wow, amazing.
And yeah. And so when that happened, I'll just say when that happened, I, kind of opened up my eyes. I was like, wow, there's maybe quite a few more people that wanted to also do this than myself. And I started doing a lot more research on, the audience, the opportunity. Was not in a position where I could go do anything with it full-time yet because I was running another company. Exited that business in late 2019, which, as we all know, is about 6 months after PASPA was repealed, and just put me at a point in life where I was able to assess what was next. And it was really at the intersection of the rise in motorsports that I knew was coming. I didn't necessarily know it was going to, I couldn't have predicted the whole drive to survive phenomenon stuff that's happened with Formula One, but I knew that motorsports was, for the most part, across the board, kind of very undervalued and long overdue for what I would call a digital revolution. And at the same time, I saw the opportunity, the sports betting space with PASPA being repealed. So it created this really interesting intersection that I knew could be a potential big opportunity. And so after we did some market research and got comfortable with, whether or not the business was venture scalable and, what the opportunity was, ended up going full time in early 2019.
Yeah. So question about, because obviously Formula One been huge in Europe and now it's starting to take hold here. I mean, it's been huge, I guess, worldwide, but let's just talk about Europe for a second, because sports betting's also been big in Europe. So was there any type of similar product in Europe for Formula One?
I think it depends on what you consider the core product of GridRival. So if we're thinking of just in terms of, pure sports betting, there were certainly places where you could go make a bet on Formula One. I think we were going after a much more enthusiast audience. And I think, like, even then, the types of experiences that existed were very, very minimal when you compared them to what was out there for, European football or different types of sports. There's just so much more coverage of everything else. And so nothing existed in the fantasy side. So the season-long fantasy product was the thing that we've spent, the most time developing. That's how we started. And that product has at this point, I think, garnered over 300,000 downloads, or sorry, registered users. And we haven't had to do a ton of marketing for that. Over half of the growth on that product has come virally from people inviting other people. So and then in the American market, obviously there's very little. When we started, there is increasingly there's more and more books on the sports betting side, and even on the daily fantasy side, the Prize Picks, Underdogs of the world. Now you can see some fantasy style games for Formula One, maybe NASCAR, but even then, outside those two, the greater motorsport space, there's just not a lot. There's not a lot of coverage.
Well, and then a related question is, to what extent does fantasy sports even exist in Europe? I've never really thought about this before, but we've got it big time in the US, perhaps primarily because it was the only thing that was allowed, whereas Europe was allowed to bet on sports, and so therefore maybe fantasy didn't take off. What do you know the answer to that?
I mean, I can tell you my experience based off of what I hear. Obviously, somebody who doesn't live there, but and has done a lot of research on it, which is it is certainly growing. I don't think there's anywhere in the world or any sport that compares on the season-long fantasy side than with the NFL. I just think, and I don't think that's because other sports aren't prepared or set up well to do it. It's just because that has been an integral part of the sport for so long. I mean, people were playing fantasy football before I was born and before the internet existed. So I think the season-long fantasy product, and this is something that we had a lot of hard lessons in. It's a seasonal product, meaning it's hard to grow it every month over month. It's hard to iterate it because people play it with this full season mindset, and so there's this thing where you have a growth opportunity for 4 or 5 weeks every single year. And so I think if we're purely talking about kind of the season-long, community camaraderie driven, competition driven product versus a true real money gaming, kind of singular, less social product, I think it is catching on. A lot of people I know over there play season-long, European football games and participate in other ways. So I do think it's growing. I don't think it's as big as it is in America, but I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. In fact, in US, it probably started more with baseball, if I'm remembering correctly, right? Yeah, I think
I'm not sure. I mean, I researched it a long time ago, and I forget the gentleman's name who kind of, was like, they call him like the godfather of fantasy football, but this was the 60s and 70s, I think.
But yeah, you're right. Its history is kind of as a social game, but probably some betting among friends, etc. I think it started with baseball, but then became bigger with football, and then it got exempted as being from federal prohibitions that and that's why DraftKings and FanDuel became what they became, and probably never really took off in Europe like it has here. But as you point out, certain sports are pretty conducive to it to the extent people want to do it, such as soccer.
Yeah. And to your point, if we're bucketing fantasy and daily fantasy in different buckets, then my answer might be a little different. I think daily fantasy is much more in its infancy outside of the United States because of exactly what you just said. We have a very weird legal landscape here where whatever you can get in a legal opinion to say as fantasy sports can be operated kind of without the same level of regulation as a true sports book, whereas in the rest of the world, like we have a UK gambling license that we've applied for and we're granted, and they don't distinguish between daily fantasy or season-long fantasy and true sports betting. If there's money involved and there's a prize and there's consideration, it's regulated.
Yeah. So speaking of, how you define fantasy in the US, season long versus daily, what are you guys doing?
So we do both. So we started as a season long game. We invested a lot of time in that money a lot of time and money into that product because it is a really incredible engagement tool. And it creates a lot of viral growth every year. it's not monetized on our app. That product is not. We use it solely as a way to get to grow the user base, to keep them engaged during the season, and ultimately are using it as a tool to introduce people to our paid games, which are
I'm sorry. Clarify when you say it's not monetized.
Meaning we don't make money off of it. We don't have ads. People don't have to pay for it. It's a completely free product.
But are they betting?
Our hope is that they will. Yeah, we're just launching one of our first kind of single player kind of pick'em type products here any day.
But sorry, what I mean is when they're playing fantasy season long against other players.
Oh, they might be, not on our platform though.
Gotcha. So you guys are just tracking it for them.
Yep.
Gotcha.
It's the game. It's the gameplay. So on our game is where they, create their leagues, manage their teams, all that sort of stuff.
Gotcha. So wouldn't the next step for you guys be, if you chose to, would be to monetize that by saying that, okay, now, it's $100 entry fee or whatever it is.
Probably,
and we take 10%?
probably not. Simply because there's so many dynamics that exist with the season long product that just don't exist with the daily type products. Number one, you're having to track something for an entire season. So on our part, just creates a lot more liability for things that go wrong, whether it's data challenges or technology challenges. And it's just not, we just don't have a ton of interest in it. And I also think I think monetizing it that way, the opportunity is not as significant because you're only having one event. If the prize comes at the end of the season, it's just not a ton of opportunities for people to do that. So I think if we did monetize it, we'd probably do it in some totally different way.
Yeah, it makes me wonder when we talk about DraftKings and FanDuel. I think they probably do monetize season long, but the percentage of their business that is season long fantasy is probably very small.
Yeah. Probably. And I mean, I honestly didn't know they have a season long fantasy football game. And I'm not sure if they do, if it's in a like traditional format, kind of like you see with Sleeper and Yahoo and ESPN. But yeah, I'm not totally sure.
So anyway, you started that always kind of understand, hey, this was going to be the way we were going to bring players in. And then now we got our player base.
we actually landed on that because at some point, I knew it was a big opportunity when we launched it because it had so much adoption. And I also knew that the motorsports fan base, both inside and outside the United States, was large enough to create some sort of venture scalable business if you could find a business model that you could attach to it. And I think it just so happened that come early, mid 2018, I was really thinking about what it would look like to be able to take advantage of the season long product that we built. And we started thinking about what are the business models that we think could be really lucrative. Real money games was nothing else that we forecasted and looked at would have come close. And we looked at, in-app purchase, we looked at monetizing it with ads and, I think that the opportunity that exists on both the fantasy and then in the future, the traditional sports betting side is much more significant.
So last question before we take our break. So when we're just talking about your season-long fantasy that you guys are hosting, not monetizing, how is your player base breakdown between Formula One versus NASCAR or anything else?
Super heavy Formula One still. So on our season-long product, we actually only have 2 sports. So going back to the other question about monetizing, season-long games are just way more time-consuming to run for a lot of different reasons. But so we have current season-long games that we have are for Formula One and MotoGP. And Formula One represents probably 90% of that audience. We will or are planning to launch our first season-long NASCAR.
We give game day a whole new meaning.
There's something special about Friday night college football games.
When you have a Friday night college game, everybody's watching. Prime time, national audience from College Park. Friday night in the shell, nothing better.
Welcome back, everybody. We are talking to Ross Fruin of GridRival, founder and CEO. It is probably the only company out there focused on motorsports, fantasy betting on motorsports. Is that a correct statement, I assume, at this point?
Minus the word betting, yes.
Okay. Fantasy. What do we call it?
Sports, daily fantasy sports. Fantasy sports and daily.
Well, speaking of betting and so on, we're going to talk about the monetization. So far, we've talked about you guys setting up this season-long fantasy for players to play for free. If they want to make a bet among themselves, that's up to them, but not something that's done on your site. Yep. And then at some point, you morphed it over into daily fantasy and are monetizing that?
We will be, yes, very, very soon. So we have 2 products that will be launching that we're very excited about. So one is more traditional kind of daily fantasy kind of draft model, right? You pick a lineup, you build a fantasy lineup. It's a salary cap game. So with Formula One, you have to pick 5 drivers and a constructor. With NASCAR, you'll pick 6 drivers. And then you compete against other players in a number of different formats, head-to-heads, small pools. That we're going to be launching big pools as well, guaranteed contests where you can enter multiple times. So that and, kind of many different iterations of it are what we call our daily fantasy product. Then we're launching a single player pick'em daily fantasy product as well. Which the current daily fantasy product is live in the app. You download GridRival today. You can play, you can download money, you can deposit money. The product that should be going live, hopefully any day now, is a kind of more single player pick'em product where you are building kind of a fantasy lineup for a single event. And you get a payout depending on how many picks you guess correctly for the event.
Mm-hmm. That's basically the prize picks model.
Very similar, yes.
Right. And so these will be the first games that you're offering where you guys are going to be accepting deposits, paying people out if they win, etc.
You got it.
And DraftKings and FanDuel, what are they doing in terms of motorsports? Are they doing anything?
They are doing some stuff. Yeah. Like I said earlier, it's pretty limited. I actually think they're doing a pretty good job with Formula One and with NASCAR. But like I said, outside of those 2, when you go into most traditional sports betting apps or even fantasy sports apps and you're scrolling through the sports, you usually at the very end of the line, you'll see something that says motorsports, where everything with wheels is they stuff everything with, wheels and an engine in that category. Mm-hmm. And so usually what you'll see is some decent coverage on NASCAR and Formula One. But outside that, you really don't see a lot of stuff like Supercross or Motocross or MotoGP or Formula E or NHRA drag racing. There's all sorts of categories that have really kind of deep and passionate followers that I think are ready to participate with real money.
What would be the next biggest? We've talked about, NASCAR and Formula One in the US. What would be the next biggest, do you think, as far as fan base?
As far as fan base, I would put IndyCar.
IndyCar, right?
Yeah, I think IndyCar is a really good product. Got sold to Roger Penske recently, and I think they've been doing a decent job at growing that brand. So I think IndyCar would be 3rd for sure. And then 4th, I honestly don't know. There's a lot of competing categories that have pretty decent followings.
Mm-hmm. So far from a regulatory standpoint, because you haven't been accepting any deposits or anything, I presume that you've just been up and running in all 50 states and didn't have to really worry about the regulatory side?
Yeah, correct. So our season-long fantasy game is global. So we have users all over the world. It is, 90% of players are in the UK, the US, and Canada. And then there's kind of like, there's the remaining 10% are mostly in other parts of Europe where Formula One is very large. But yeah, completely free, unregulated, and can play anywhere you want.
And has your business objective simply being to build for now a big player base and not worry about monetizing it up until now?
It's always been to monetize it. I think it's been a long road to get there. As you know, there's a lot of, barriers and things that you have to get through. And I think there's, there's other parts of infrastructure in this space that you have to build just to get to market. You have to build a digital wallet. You have to be able to store people's money. There's a lot of different things like that we've been working on over the last 18 months. So the journey started in late 2021, which is when we raised our first kind of venture capital backed seed round. And the whole goal of that was to get everything you're going to see, over the last 30 days and the next 30 days live. So it's always been the plan since I went and started full time. It's been the plan, but it's taken some time to get to market for sure.
Right. Well, and of course, there's other ways you theoretically could have monetized it besides taking deposits. Yes. Have you considered others, or has there been any other advertising or any other method of?
Yeah, we did. I think it was just that, like as I alluded to, I think none of them were, in our eyes, as long-term lucrative. I think they could have been, if we went that route, I think it could have been a good maybe lifestyle business, but certainly not something that I think was capable of returning, venture style business opportunities. I think the one path that we saw forward to build a really successful business with a significant valuation was on the real money gaming side.
So what does it look like these days to launch in fantasy when you look at it state by state? How many are you able to launch in no problem versus some, you have to get licenses?
I'll say it depends on what attorney you ask and, who writes the legal opinion and all that stuff. But I'll just say, generally speaking, there's about 25 states that you could launch in today if you're building a daily fantasy product without any sort of license. It doesn't mean it's simple. You still have to get, if you get legal opinions, you have to get approval through a bank, you have to get approval through payment processors. So there's still many barriers, but getting an actual license or registering isn't necessarily one of them. There are another, again, very give this plus or minus maybe 5 depending on some different things that are happening, but there's another probably 15 to 20 states where they've said daily fantasy sports is allowed here, but you have to register or you have to get some form of license, and those are anywhere from free in the very early stages to some states are $50,000. And then there's a handful of states that have flat out said this is sports betting and it's not legal. You can't operate here under any circumstance.
Yeah. List a couple of those states for me.
Off the top of my head, I believe Washington is one of them. I think Utah is another one. So,
yeah, you got some of their usual, your Utahs and your sometimes Hawaii and Alaska, I think can be
I think actually Nevada might be one of them as well. Again, I don't have the list off the top of my head, and yeah.
Sometimes you got some Bible Belt states that are. Texas has always been like. What about Texas? What about Texas?
Texas is legal. Yeah, okay. Texas is legal. Or sorry, legal is not the right term, but
not prohibited.
Yeah, not prohibited. Exactly. California, not prohibited. Florida is obviously a state that, if you've been following any of the news, is kind of on the fence. There's some early discussions around what they're going to do over there. But
I didn't realize. I've been following Florida to the extent of the Seminoles and the court cases and sports betting. But does that also apply to fantasy?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Florida has not been allowing fantasy, essentially.
No, they have. Again, this is like it's such a gray area. I think allowing is not necessarily the right term. They have certainly not been pursuing any sort of action against any operators that have been there, including FanDuel or DraftKings, for a very long time. I believe it was just last week that some of the bigger daily fantasy operators, Prize Picks, Underdog, some of those guys were sent cease and desist letters kind of saying, anything that is daily fantasy sports or involves real money is not allowed unless it's through a Seminole tribe. So I've kind of been following it closely. I think it's not going to go down that easily. I can just tell you that there's a lot of very large fantasy sports operators, including FanDuel and DraftKings, that operate there. I think it's probably going to be some sort of continuing discussion in some way, shape, or form that happens. But we shall
The-
see.
The states that are regulating it, are they putting a special tax in place on it also?
On fantasy sports or on traditional sports?
Fantasy.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I don't know the exact. Oh, you're talking about the states that are requiring like the 15
Licensing.
Yes, yes, some of them are. Again, I'm not going to have all these memorized, and this is one of the challenges of operating in this country. Is every single state is kind of has differing opinions of how they do things. So some may, some may not. Some states have very peculiar rules around responsible gaming settings you have to have, where some states don't. Some states require you to be able to identify experienced players versus non-experienced players. So taxation is certainly something that fits into that bucket as well.
And of course, with regular sports betting, you've got all the importance of geofencing to make sure that your players are in the state that you're legal and licensed in. And when you talk about fantasy, is there any reason that you need to geofence?
Absolutely.
Other than keeping out of the states that you're not in? But I mean, can I have a player in California in the same fantasy game against a player in Texas?
Oh, yes, you can do that. So in the traditional sports betting world, the Money Wire Act kind of comes into place and has created a lot of challenges for that specific scenario. In the fantasy sports space, you can play with another player in a different state.
Right. And how much are you tracking the daily fantasy laws pertaining to these pick'em games where it's you're not really playing against other players? You pick three and you get a certain payout if all three of them
very
hit.
closely. I mean,
the prize picks model basically.
Yeah, so we obviously pay close attention to it, and have a very well-equipped legal team to help us with some of those issues. So again, another topic that is going to continue. I don't think there's been any specific. There certainly hasn't been any changes to the federal laws of the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act that have created kind of this space called daily fantasy and fantasy sports. But it's certainly become the forefront of conversation more so over the past 30 to 90 days than the previous year or two.
Is it in the courts somewhere?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
again, I think there's probably more well-equipped people to talk specifically about the exact details of cases and stuff like that. But you've got certainly it's open to being litigated because it does seem like a gray area as far as what's considered fantasy and what's not. And there's a lot of money being made out there by Prize Picks and others on it. And then you got a lot of state attorney generals out there. And then you've got these private attorneys that go out and bring class actions, for all the money that their players lost. Yeah. I mean, look, I think we are 4.5 years post PASPA, and in terms of the lifetime of an industry, that's a very small amount of time. And so I think, especially one that's heavily regulated and requires so much, changes to the law and lobbying and all the things that are required to make change happen. And so I think over time you're going to see some of these things iterate and move, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they happen. But I think we certainly have a long ways to go.
Yeah. Let's wrap up with this question. How far away are we from seeing a big ad for GridRival on the wall at Daytona?
Ooh, wall at Daytona. I would say I could very confidently see that in maybe 2025. Maybe late 2024. I mean, Daytona, the race is in Daytona 500s here in 3 or 4 months, so we're definitely not going to have it up then. But maybe next year.
So but the first you're going to launch is Formula One and then NASCAR, or you're launching them both at the same time?
Nope, those are both going to be live on our Pick'em game when it goes live. NASCAR Daily Fantasy in the kind of traditional daily fantasy draft sense will become it's live for Formula One. NASCAR will be coming out probably closer to the end of the NASCAR season. We're actually building that product right now.
And
but pretty close.
And people are going to bet on your not bet, but play your games on
Yes.
your website and on an app.
Just on apps right now. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they can download it right now, I assume.
Absolutely. Both
Yeah.
For Google and Google Play Store and App Store on Apple.
Cool. Well, congratulations, Russ, on your success so far. It sounds like a very nice sports betting niche, which is important to find these days, considering the big boys that are out there and tough to compete. We didn't get a chance to talk about your digital marketing background, but I'm sure that is coming in handy big time, because you can have the greatest product in the world, but if you don't get the word out about it and get players on it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, no, I think you're very correct. I think ultimately the biggest challenge that any operator in the space has to solve is user acquisition right now. There's some very big players with a lot of money. And I think the entire strategy around, a niche game has really why we've positioned it that way. Just because I think if you come out of the gates and you have, a sport agnostic platform, you either have to have a very, very unique product, or you have to be able to raise $50 to $100 million out the gate, like we've seen with Better and Mojo and some of these other startups that have went more kind of broad as far as sports go. So,
what is you have any little secret sauce in how you're going to bring betters that you want to keep that to yourself?
Probably keep it to myself right now, but I think I'll just say we are really, really focused on product, especially our season-long product as a top funnel tool. Outside of that, we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline for sure.
Yeah, you've already got a ton of players, so you're well on your way.
Yeah.
All right, my friend, appreciate it. Russ Fruin, founder and CEO of GridRival. Thanks so much for coming on Double Down.
Yep, thanks so much for having me.
All right, and thank you all for watching and listening to Double Down. We'll be back soon with another great interview. Take care, everyone.